I think we'll get started. We may have some more people filter in as they get signed on, but we're gonna get rolling here. So thank you for coming to our webinar, our Ask Us Anything webinar on grazing cover crops. My name is Caitlin Congdon. I'm the field crop specialist at Perennia, and I will be moderating our session today.
I'm Katie Trottier. I'm Perennia Beef and Sheep Specialist. So I'm based out of here in Truro, but I work with producers from across the province of Nova Scotia.
And I'm Shane Wood. I'm the lead research coordinator and forage specialist at Perennia, based out of Truro, Nova Scotia. And just here and available for any questions that come up for this.
Perfect. And behind the scenes, we have Lindsay Scott, who is our off-calf technician, and she is going to be adding some links and resources into the chat as we kind of go along today. So thank you, Lindsay, for being here for that. And thank you to the On-Farm Climate Action Fund for allowing us to put this webinar on. But I think we're going to jump right into it here and get started with our first question. So since we're talking about grazing cover crops today, we're going to start with a basic one. And under this context, what would be considered a cover crop, and would it still be considered a cover crop if it's harvested for animal feed? So Shane, you can start us off.
Sure. What is considered a cover crop? In my opinion, a cover crop is a really wide definition. It encompasses a lot of different crops. It encompasses a lot of different goals. These crops can be annuals or they can be perennials. And it's really the goal of the crop that's going to be important. When we're talking about cover crops, we're often talking about improving our soil health. Maybe that's through our improving our soil microbiology. It could be with reducing soil erosion or improving water infiltration into the soil. We may want to use it as a green manure so we can capture some of those nutrients and recycle them back into the soil. Or maybe we want to use it as a feed source as well, while we're still doing these other goals as well. In terms of whether it's still considered a cover crop if it has been cut for feed, I want to say yes. I believe it is a yes, and that's because there are other goals with these crops outside of feed. And as long as you keep that in mind, it still is considered a cover crop, in my opinion. Katie, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I think the big thing that kind of differentiates a cover crop from like a forage crop or an annual crop is that your primary goal is the soil, first and foremost. It's going to be that roof on your soil. And certainly being able to graze that, it's going to help to improve that soil as well. So I think that's one of the pillars of regenerative agriculture, is getting these animals onto this land that wouldn't traditionally have had them, these croplands. And livestock can do a lot of good for that land, and having that on is very positive. So certainly, definitely considered a cover crop putting animals on. And through the off-calf program as well, definitely can graze cover crops as long as you're leaving 6 inches of residue over winter, just to act as that roof and keep that soil covered. If you're harvesting it as like silage, for example, you'll want to keep in mind that you're exporting those nutrients from that field. And if you are spreading that manure back on, that's really great. You don't necessarily get the same amount of nutrients. There is typically some that is lost in there. So pretty interesting. It's kind of a gray area in terms of, yeah, when you're removing that from the field, definitely more beneficial to bring the animals to the field. So, yeah,
those are some great points. I did forget to say, if anybody has any questions as we're going through today, feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A, and we will get to as many as we can. We did have a number of questions come in through the registration and beforehand, so we've got lots to talk about today. So yeah, Katie, I think I'll go back to you and ask about what cover crops can be used for grazing sheep and cattle, and could they also be used for stored feed?
So this question, I almost want to change it, and what cover crops can't you use for grazing animals? Because I think the beauty of ruminant animals is that they take a really low value crop or something that we might not be using and turn it into a really high quality protein. So a lot of these crops that we are using as cover crops certainly make really great animal feed. So knowing that, I would almost start with what are your goals for that cover crop kind of outside of feed? So if you're looking for reducing erosion, or maybe you're looking at like breaking up compaction or tying up some nutrients in the field, I might start there first before kind of adding that animal piece onto it. So there are some tools that you could look at. First of all, the Perennia off-calf website has a lot of great resources in terms of figuring out what cover crop you might want to work with in order to support your goals, like from a cropping perspective and like the soil perspective. There's also a cover crop selection tool that's on Farm Data Tools.
Yeah.
That's a really cool tool. Highly recommend checking that out, and then kind of adding that animal piece in afterwards. So there's definitely like some management concerns depending on what kind of crop that you're going for. But that kind of comes into, yeah, the individual species.
Right, for sure.
Yeah. And then I've, sorry, forgotten. There's a second part of that question.
Can they be used for stored feed?
They can, kind of going back to that first question of, is it still a cover crop if you are harvesting it? Just be mindful that you're taking the nutrients from the soil and you're taking it off that cropland. There are some crops that you might actually want to mow just to keep that plant in a vegetative state while it's growing, keep it sequestering carbon. So in that circumstance, like certainly you could harvest that for silage. Yeah, it also might come down to like what your fertilizer plans are as well.
Right.
Yeah, so yes, you can. It's a little bit kind of, yeah, gray area.
Yeah, for sure. I like to think about cover crops too as kind of an emergency feed option. So if you did come into the spring, if you had a cover crop over the winter and you came into the spring and kind of needed a little bit extra, then it might be something that you could get your animals out to graze that or to harvest it for stored feed as needed.
Yeah.
Certainly, and as especially in a case where maybe you have some large winter kill in your pastures or some of your other fields, you know, because that soil is going to be exposed, that area is going to be exposed to the elements. You know, going back to the definition for cover crops, growing something just to keep the soil in place and tie up those nutrients is a great option in those cases. And in those circumstances, you can definitely use it for feed as well.
Okay. Continuing on from that, like livestock perspective, Katie, would there be concerns about low fiber for ruminants with grazing certain species?
Yeah, brassicas in particular, and some of those grass species that are like early in the vegetative state,
right?
And there's just not a lot to them. And cover crops in general, there is a lot of management that comes along with them just because they are really great sources of feed. You don't want to just let animals who are not used to grazing them just have free rein. Like you'll definitely want to be like strip grazing, limiting access to it, moving them when they're full. And part of that is supplying a source of fiber on the pasture. So if you've got some hay bales, really good practice to offer that to your animals, let them fill up on that and then move them. So that'll help prevent some health issues. It'll also help to just add bulk and add some fiber to that diet. Because a lot of these cover crops are low fiber and great quality, they tend to just pass right through your animals, and they don't transit time is so fast, you don't actually have a lot of those nutrients. They're just coming out the back end. Right. The transit time is too fast. So by slowing that down, your livestock will have a chance to absorb more of those nutrients.
Okay. What about using, Shane, I'll go over to you. What about using cover crops to improve your forage quality? And would there be species or a mix that you would recommend for that purpose?
So you can, again, you can use cover crops. You can certainly use cover crops to improve your forage quality. I do want to just kind of point out though, that if the main goal is just to improve forage quality, then I wouldn't necessarily consider that a cover crop. You do want to have some of these other goals in mind as well. So maybe you want to increase your water infiltration as an example. The thing that we The other thing that I want to take into account is what is this additional crop going to do that's different than the perennial pasture that's already there? If the pasture is already providing soil cover, it's already going to be tying up some of those nutrients. So if you're going to add something new into there, what's that additional benefit that's going to be there outside of forage quality? If we're wanting to improve our forage yields and quality, maybe it could be improving our fertility or timing of when we're actually grazing. Outside of that, to establish cover crop into a already established pasture, you want to use something like a no-till seeder, so you're actually able to cut into the sod and make sure you're getting that seed to soil contact. You would also want to consider the time of year that you're going to be needing that additional feed, and make sure that you're planting the cover crop, you're sowing the seed, and giving it enough time to actually establish and be available when you're going to need it. The other things to consider are with an already established pasture, we do need to do some maintenance on that pasture because it's going to compete with this new cover crop that we're trying to put in there. So you may need to, you want to go in maybe shortly after grazing or after it's been mowed, graze it or mow it kind of aggressively down to about 2 to 3 inches. And be careful with applying any fertilizer. You do want to feed both of these crops because you want to carry both of them. But in some ways, they're gonna the cover crop is gonna act like a weed to your perennial pasture, your perennial forage. But we need to be careful with what we're going to be putting down. If we put down maybe too much nitrogen, that already established pasture can take off and really outcompete these cover crops that we're trying to get established for later in the year. And yeah, I get the feeding side of it is a really important part, and it is a hard balance to take into account. If we don't put any fertilizer or some nutrient down, we may just end up having a disappointing crop, and it's really not going to reach the full potential that we want from it.
Awesome. Yeah, lots of considerations. Would there be any particular species or mixes that you might recommend for this kind of situation?
I don't like to recommend cover crops, species mixtures in general, just because the goals are such an important aspect of it, and
so individualized.
It's so individualized for when you're going to be needing it, the goals that you're going to that you want to accomplish outside of the feed, improving feed quality. The other side of it is that companies change their mixes from one year to the next and what's available. So I'd really recommend talking with those seed suppliers to see what is there. But make sure that you have a firm idea of what your goals are going to be and when you're going to be needing that extra additional feed.
Yeah, excellent. We did have just a comment that says cover crops make great microbe food and can aid in nutrient cycling. So shout out for mentioning no-till. So Shane, sticking with you again, would bird's foot trefoil be a good grazing crop?
Bird's foot trefoil, I will throw it to Katie for some of this as well. The bird's foot trefoil is a good grazing crop. It can perform well in that situation. The thing to consider though is that it can be, some of the older varieties can be difficult to establish. And so you may not get as full of a stand or as much bird's foot trefoil as you want in a pasture. I wouldn't really call it a cover crop though. It's just going to be an additional feed source there. Bird's foot trefoil does not have much in the way of a root system and doesn't store a lot of energy in its root system until the fall time. We need to be careful when we're grazing it. Animals tend to really like bird's foot trefoil and they will go after it constantly. So you want to make sure you're giving it lots of rest. Again, because it doesn't store a lot of energy into its root system. And it has other benefits like the tannin content, which has been shown locally to improve the average daily gains of some animals. And I don't know if Katie has some more information with that.
I think the big thing for bird's foot trefoil, good grazing crop, good for animals, bad cover crop. I would, if that's your goal, I would not choose bird's foot trefoil just because it's, the establishment and the root system is not ideal. And tannins are make it a low methane a lower methane producing crop as well. So that fits in really well with some of these off-cap initiatives and trying to work towards lowering carbon footprints.
Right. Yeah, so if you had experienced people who've had success with grazing versus retrieval?
Yeah, it's a really good pasture species.
Yeah.
It's just making sure that you've got the right variety, because some of them, yeah, establishment can be kind of hit or miss.
Right. So thinking about establishment, is that something that we could frost seed?
Yes, Dr. Joseph Papadopoulos and Dr. Kathleen Glover out of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada at the Mapan Research Station do a lot of work on frost seeding. They're currently doing work on birdsfoot trefoil and alfalfa and red clover, looking at different ways to improve the success of frost seeding. And that research is ongoing, so we look forward to seeing the results from that research. Birdsfoot trefoil is definitely something that you can frost seed. It has varying success. When frost seeding anything, we do need to be careful with the already established biomass that's there. We need to make sure that we're cutting it short or grazing it short before we put in that seed, because we really need to get that seed to soil contact. And the time of year is critical. We really want that freezing and thawing action that's going on around now, or even maybe a little bit earlier in the year, depending on where you are. The only other thing with birdsfoot trefoil to remember when grazing is it needs a long rest period. So don't allow the animals to get back to it and constantly eat it, because they'll eat it out of your field very quickly.
Okay, great. Just before we leave birdsfoot trefoil, do you have a recommendation on where you can source seed?
I do. Every company, sorry, not every company, different seed companies do have birdsfoot trefoil that's out there. Often the variety that I see is Leo. That's an older variety. There is a newer variety called Bruce, we'll say AC Bruce. And you can source it through a supplier in Manitoba. I think it's Interlake Forages. Yeah, if you want to contact me later, I can double check that and provide that information.
Great, thank you. All right. So a lot of the time we think about cover crops being over the winter, but there's definitely cover crops that fit at all of the different points within the season. So Katie, which cover crops could be used at those different points? So spring, summer, and fall grazing.
Yeah, pretty broad question, lots of different options here. For spring, I would say that your winter cereals would probably be the first thing that would come up here, kind of what you'd be limited to. So something like fall rye, like fall cereal rye, not ryegrass, being a different species. I think that's probably, if you see that kind of late summer into fall, that would give you the option. You could graze that in the fall moderately. You could also graze that again in the spring. That's probably going to be the first thing that is ready for grazing. Something like winter wheat would be an option as well. I think pellet really both would be similar, maybe slightly higher for winter wheat. The thing about spring grazing is that I know they found this in Ontario. I assume that it would be true here as well. It's just that it takes a long time for soil to dry out in the spring.
Yeah, for sure.
So even if you're trying to like extend your grazing season earlier and get those animals out on pasture sooner, you might kind of run into the same time frame, just if the ground is not ready to support those animals. So yeah, by the time the ground dries out enough, you might be kind of looking at your permanent pasture or perennial pastures. For summer, if we're considering how pastures grow in like out here, a lot of our cool season grasses, you'll see that summer slump. And so this is a really great chance to look at grazing cover crops in the summer when we're seeing that summer slump, especially if we've got a drought situation, we might be starting to run out of pasture. So warm season grasses kind of fit in really well here. So things like sorghum Sudan grass, pearl millet would be options. These are two crops that I would be, well, sorghum Sudan grass or like sorghum or Sudan grass, I would be pretty cautious of grazing. You absolutely can graze it. You could also harvest this for silage as well, just because of the risk of prussic acid poisoning when that plant is stressed. So just be conscientious of that. If you are cutting that for silage, that compound will kind of break down as it goes through that ensiling process, so the risk is mitigated that way. For fall, that's kind of where we have, yeah, got lots of options. We've got those fall cereals that we could start grazing a couple weeks, like maybe 6 weeks after planting, like at the end of the summer. We can also start to look at some brassica species. Those are going to be the ones that are going to hold their quality the longest. So even after we have a killing frost, often those brassicas will still be around. And with careful management, those can be grazed and it helped to extend that grazing season kind of after our regular pastures run out. Just quickly, before we wrap up with this question, brassicas, you also want to be careful grazing, just because there's also the risk of them accumulating nitrates, which can cause nitrate poisoning, and also sulfates, and you can run into some polio issues as well. So some of those previous things I mentioned, like feeding hay, making sure they're full when you're feeding them, things to keep in mind, but certainly it's awesome when you keep livestock out longer throughout the year.
One other thing I would say with some of the warm season grasses, like the sorghum Sudan grass, and even some of the Sudan grass, you really should try to graze those maybe in a strip till fashion or a controlled fashion. We want to make sure that the animals are not going back and eating that younger growth, because the younger growth is usually higher in prussic acid. So we really do want to make sure that we're managing our animals and not letting them get back to that growth until it reaches the pre-identified height. I don't have it on me at the moment, but it changes from different species. It changes between Sudan grass, sorghum Sudan grass, and sorghum grass.
Yeah, that's an excellent point.
Yeah, awesome. All right, so if we are in a pasture renovation situation, would cover crops be a fit here to use potentially to help eliminate weeds and improve the soil structure?
Yes, I do want to define what I mean with a renovation, and I mean a complete renovation. In this case, we're terminating that permanent pasture.
Right.
And we're going to maybe take a year off to improve our soil pH, improve our nutrient content that we do have there. So having a cover crop is a great option because we can make sure we're reducing that soil erosion. We can keep all of our nutrients tied up, lose them from that field. Using the cover crop in this situation, it really can provide the competition to our weeds. We do want to be careful with what cover crop we're going to be using. If we use something that is more of a pure stand or a single species that is like a grass, so maybe we're looking at a cereal crop or an annual ryegrass, that gives us an option to use some chemical herbicides to control the weeds that are out there, particularly our broadleaf weeds. If we move to a polycrop situation where we have a mixture of grasses and broadleaf crops in our cover crop, that's going to really limit our herbicide options that we have. So we would need to be able to manage things through mechanical means or through grazing with our animals. The other thing that we take into account is for the cover crops is we can incorporate those back into the soil. So again, the nutrients that we did tie up, we can return some of those to the soil and not diminish the nutrients that we do have there or that we put down. And I don't think there's anything else off the top of my head.
You covered lots there. No, that's great. Okay, awesome. So obviously we're doing this with off-calf today, and some of the off-calf BMPs are rotational grazing and cover cropping. So this next question kind of ties both of those together. So Katie, how would you recommend fencing a field to graze that does not have an existing perimeter fence?
Yes, so this is probably one of the biggest challenges in taking advantage of cover crops as feed. But there are a lot of really great options for fertile fencing. I would say my first consideration would be the livestock. And you want to be using animals that are quiet. They're not going to touch the fences. So training your animals at home to electric fences before you put them on a neighbor's field, for
Right.
example, is going to be my first step.
Yeah.
And yeah, keeping in mind that an electric fence is a psychological barrier more than anything.
Right.
So if they're respecting of fences, that's going to make things much easier. But yeah, there's lots of options for like temporary fencing. So something like timeless fence posts would be like a pretty easy option for fencing cattle.
Mhm.
And a lot of the stuff could be funded through off-cap as well. For sheep, Electronet works really well for keeping them contained. So yeah, I guess water goes hand in hand with that, and being able to make sure that animals have access to water. So even like hauling water out, depending on how close they are, how many animals you're watering, that could be an option as well.
Right.
If you're lucky and there's just like a stream nearby and you can pump water out of that into some troughs, that's another option that you could look at as well, using like a solar powered pump, something to consider. So yeah, it's definitely adds a layer of like complexity to it, but there are ways around it.
Yeah, no, definitely. There's some good options there. All right. Shane, would there be any advantage in seeding with a perennial forage so that the forage would establish after the cover crop is gone?
Yes. So the term that people may know instead would be a nurse crop or a companion crop. We can use our cover crop as a nurse or companion crop. And the idea is just to provide some cover, provide time and competition for the weeds while our perennial pastures or perennial forage is establishing. Something that we really need to be careful of and need to keep in mind, though, is that the goal is to establish the perennial forage. And so all management decisions need to emphasize and need to be put into that context. So if a decision needs to be made that's going to be at the hindrance or negatively impact the cover crop, that has to be done because it's the perennial forage that's going to be important at the end of it all. The perennial forage can act as a weed to the cover crop can act as a weed to our perennial forage. So we do want to be aware that it is competing for light, for water, for nutrients, and that if we are going to feed it, we need to feed both of those crops, because again, we don't want to just kind of limp these along and then potentially impact the perennial forage in the long run.
Right. So kind of going along with that, is there an advantage to planting into a perennial forage that's already established to enhance grazing? We already kind of talked about that.
We did talk about it a little bit. I guess the addition is, so the advantage would be extending your grazing season, like Katie said, or even, managing that summer slump that can occur. So that's really the biggest advantage. It's just providing additional feed at a time when you may need it. Again, the thing to really take into account though is, when are you going to need that feed, and make sure that you are sowing that cover crop mix or that stand, whatever it's going to, the pure stand, whatever it's going to be, at the appropriate time, so that you're going to have it when you need it. And then the other side of it is you have to remember that you're going to be taking that paddock potentially out of commission. The animals can't go back in there while the cover crop is establishing, because the animals are going to go to that cover crop or those different crops there and really set them back or remove them from the field.
Right, yeah, for sure. When they're little vulnerable, little seedlings, they're just gonna get trampled to death, or they're gonna get ripped out. They're nice and tasty when they're that small.
Very palatable, very easy to get grazed in.
Yeah, for sure. We do have a couple of questions coming in, so this one's more just on the grazing end of things, not so much cover crops, but we'll go for it anyways. Are there differences between grazing alfalfa and forage alfalfa strains? This person wants to graze their alfalfa hayfield in the late fall. So would like a strain that was specific for grazing be a better option?
Sorry, they're doing hay and grazing?
They want to graze their alfalfa hayfield.
Graze their alfalfa hayfield.
Late fall.
So the thing that I would be more concerned with grazing late fall is the time of year of when you're gonna be grazing the alfalfa. You wanna make sure that you don't give too much opportunity for the alfalfa to start regrowing and really start pulling on those root reserves that it has needed to store up so that it can overwinter with success. In terms of a cultivar that is more upright versus creeping, which maybe is what we see with the grazing cultivars. I don't know if they're, off the top of my head, I don't know if there would be a huge advantage outside of maybe the different root systems that can that may appear in those grazing types compared to the more upright cultivars that are out there.
Right. Okay. Great. Let's see here. Yeah, so Lindsay is helping and answering some of these questions as well, but I'll just read it out so everybody gets it. Are there any plans for Perennia to conduct cover crop trials or collect data from producers that are using these practices? And will that information be collected and shared with agricultural producers? Which certainly we've had some off-calf demonstrations over the past couple of years, and we are coming up to the new iteration of off-calf 2.0, we're calling it, which stay tuned for more information on that. That should be coming out in April. But yes, certainly we do have plans for some more demos. Lindsay also mentioned that we were able to update the maritime pasture manual. So that'll be available digitally, but also have some printed copies of that as well. Any other off-calf related demos that you guys have kind of on the books that you want to mention now?
Seeding demo.
Yes, we are hoping to do some pasture walks around some frost seeding demonstrations that we have ongoing right now. Our goal is going to be to frost seed different legumes, so red clover, white clover, birchwood trefoil, and alfalfa, as well as chicory into some pastures. We're going to compare these in strips with seeding with more than 1 year. So there'll be a strip that's only been seeded for year 1. There'll be a strip that's been seeded for frost seeded for 2 years, and there'll be a strip that's been frost seeded for 3 years in a row, and just show the improvement of the different species, or lack of improvement of the different species in those settings under working farm conditions. So stay tuned for details about that. We successfully, well, we'll see how successful we were, but we've gone out and frost seeded 2 different locations on the western side of the province, and then we're hoping to do Central and Cape Breton shortly.
Also, a lot of the demos that we have done previously, they're available on Perennia's website.
Yeah.
The YouTube, and then if you go to offcalf.perennia.ca, a lot of the videos about the different species and kind of the merits and how they grow are available.
Yeah.
Another thing that we've done in the past, we actually did a cover crop grazing demonstration a couple of years ago on farm. So there was a producer that harvested, I think it was a cereal crop, harvested it end of July maybe, and then mid-August planted a cover crop cocktail mix.
Okay.
Which we haven't really talked about cocktail mixes yet.
No.
But they're a super awesome option.
Yeah.
So the idea with cocktail mix is you have maybe upwards of 15 to 20 different species of all sorts of different types of plants. So you've got cool season grasses, brassicas, you might have warm season grasses, legumes in there. And one of the great things about them is seasons tend to be pretty variable. So if you get a drought, or if you get a lot of rain, or if you get a cooler summer or a really hot summer,
there'll be something.
chances are something's going to grow. Even if some things might not take off, but there's going to be something, and that's a really like diverse diet for your livestock too.
For sure.
So we worked with the producer, and he had seeded a field in this cocktail mix, and then he put his animals out there, I think at the start of December, and he got about 3 weeks of grazing off of that. So we do have a YouTube video about that specifically that's on our, Perennia's website.
Awesome.
So check it out if you're interested.
Great. yeah, maybe Lindsay, you can share the, there's lots of individual videos, but maybe if you just share the link to our YouTube page and hopefully people can find some stuff there. Yeah, also, if you are a producer that's doing something really cool, we always want to talk about cool things, and there might be opportunities for us to be able to showcase some of that as well. So if you have a cool idea or you're doing something neat, give us a call.
Yeah.
Happy to talk about it. Great. All right, getting back into some more questions. Katie, can you recommend some spring season extension crops to be grazed by sheep and cattle?
Yes, so this, I think, I don't know if I'm changing my answer from previous, probably those fall cereals
Yeah.
would be my
Yeah.
recommendation.
For sure.
So, yeah,
Great.
short and sweet.
Short and sweet, we like it. All right, will the cold of winter kill these species, or will they become an issue next year, and particularly something that would be tough to kill and could potentially become a weed issue or something like that?
Sorry, before I answer this,
Yeah.
is this an extension of that first part of the question?
Yeah.
Or is it brand new?
I think we could look at it either way.
Okay,
Let's say it's an extension.
okay, so, yeah, hopefully you don't, if you're planting something like fall rye
Yes.
or winter wheat.
Yeah.
Hopefully you're not gonna
Those
get
shouldn't,
winter kill.
yeah, those shouldn't die.
I think a lot of the cover crop species will be killed out by winter, like
Mhm.
brassica species will be, any annual clovers will be, if there's red clover in there,
Mhm.
and that might persist. Yeah, so I think the species that will not be winter killed would be those kind of fall
Yeah.
cereals, red clover.
Yep.
Yeah.
Definitely.
We,
Anything to add?
oh yeah, I was gonna say, we actually haven't talked about it from that side of things.
Yeah.
So something to consider with our cover crops is, if we allow them to go to seed, they can become an issue,
Totally.
become future weed problems. So do take that into account, whether you're doing a polycrop or any of the grazing that we've talked about before.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's certainly some species in polycrops that can overwinter.
Yeah.
And become a future issue. And so you may need to come up with, may need to have in the back of your head a management plan to terminate those.
Mhm.
And then this is not really related, it's just an aside, but if we're talking about, it just popped into my head.
No, it's
But if we're talking about cover crops going to seed,
Yes.
there's some mixes that will have like hairy vetch,
Right.
or hairy vetch could be a cover crop.
Yep.
That is one of the cover crops I'd be kind of like a little bit leery about, just because
Right.
it's great to graze when it's not gone to seed, but once
Yeah.
it goes to seed, there's been some reports of like toxicity issues.
Right.
So
Okay.
yeah, be mindful of that.
Yeah, so timing, I think, especially with some of the mixes, because things will be flowering and
Yeah.
setting seeds at different times, just really being mindful of what's there and the timing, and whether I'm thinking about mustards in particularly. Mustards can very easily, like they crank through their cycle pretty quickly,
Yeah.
they set seed, and then they definitely can turn into a weed. They're an awesome cover crop. Just as long as you're, like Shane said, have a management plan
Yeah.
for that, whether it's grazing them off or mowing them or some other form of termination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I forgot about mustards.
Oh, mustards.
Yeah.
So from a cropping standpoint, mustards are an awesome cover crop, especially if you're trying to battle like wireworms and nematodes and things like that. So yeah, definitely oak there a lot, but could be an issue.
Yeah.
The other, we haven't really touched on it. The other thing to just kind of be aware of is who is grazing these cover crops.
Mhm.
So what may be safe for a cow, or maybe safe to sheep, may not be safe to horses. So really be cautious about what animals are going to be out on that cover crop.
Okay. Great. So a few more questions coming in. Are there resources on different cocktail mixes? So just imagining that there's some would be better for different times of year, and who makes the mixes?
This is something I have to get back to.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, I don't have anything.
I can comment on that a little bit if you want. So yeah, a lot of the seed companies will have a bunch of different cocktail mixes, either for cover cropping or for grazing or whatever. And some of them are marketed specifically for like, this is the spring pollinator mix, or this is something that's a little hardier and it's gonna do well in the fall. So, but there's a lot of different options out there. I would say in terms of resources, you just want to be really looking at those different whatever's available from the different seed companies and seeing what those options are, and feel free to call your extension person to see if that's going to be the right fit.
Yeah, and I'll just jump back
Yeah.
in. If you were interested in particularly in grazing this cocktail mix, if you want to know the mix that we use for that demo, that's something I could get. I just don't have it.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
top
for
of my
sure.
head.
No, that's great.
Yeah, and talk with your local egg supplier companies as well. You know, they're often handling multiple seed from multiple different companies, so
Yeah.
they may have more information.
Have a good handle on the different availability. Sure. Okay, is there a legume that you could use as a cover crop after winter wheat? And graze it in the fall, and then the following spring, say you want to plant something like corn. So a winter or a fall winter legume, putting you right on the spot here.
After winter wheat's getting harvested, say
Late July, early August.
early August.
Yeah.
You might have time to establish something like red clover,
Mhm.
and get enough growth out of it to be able to put down energy reserves, and that should overwinter.
Mhm.
And then you could graze it the following year.
Mhm.
I would want to combine that with a grass, so it's not so rich.
Yeah.
Would be the only thing that I would want to add to that.
What about an oat pea mix? Is that like, that's a great cover crop for that time period? Would that have decent feed value?
It's really good.
Oh, okay, great, perfect.
But you wouldn't be able to overwinter it.
No, but you could graze it that fall, it would winter kill, and then you'd easily be able to plant the crop the following spring.
I think that's a really good point about, especially with legumes, diluting that down, because a lot of these cover
Yeah.
crops are like, they're small when they're being grazed
Yeah,
often, and you can run into some issues with bloat for sure.
right.
So I think doesn't matter what the species is, like there's excellent opportunity, but management is just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Here. Oh, this is an interesting one. So, would grazing cattle close to their time of butchering, whether that's on brassicas, or other cover crops, would that put an off taste on the meat?
I would just remove them like a week prior to slaughter.
Okay.
So yeah, it can, but yeah, just take them off, feed them something else. It shouldn't run into too many issues.
Okay. Let's see, which forage crops are best for goats that could be planted and thrive well in Newfoundland? So something cold hardy.
Yes. So I would recommend soil testing to get your soil pH, your fertility.
Mhm.
The conditions in Newfoundland can be quite different than what's here in Nova Scotia. So I would also really recommend talking to your local extension staff
Mhm.
and local agronomists that are there. Some options that I think could work could be some of the clovers, like red or white clover. For grasses, you could do something like tall or meadow fescue. For a forb, maybe look into chicory. And then some other annuals could be, as Katie just mentioned, actually some of the brassicas, like forage kale, turnip, or rape, are all different crops that could potentially work for goats.
Okay, great. Katie, what is the palatability of cover crop species, including like daikon and tillage and fodder type radishes?
So with brassicas in general, animals might not be, especially if it's in a cocktail mix.
Yeah.
They might be a little bit put off, especially if they haven't been they're not used to it.
Mhm.
So they might, and if there's not enough grazing pressure, they'll eat everything else,
Right.
and that'll be their last choice.
Yeah.
But once they get onto it, they tend to develop a taste for it.
Okay,
And then it tends to be not much of an issue, and they'll actually go after that and dig the root bulbs like out of the ground.
they just need an open mind.
Exactly. And I will kind of say, just if you do have like a cover crop mix, like a cocktail mix.
Yep.
And they're allowed to kind of graze selectively a little bit. If they eat everything else and then everything that's left is brassicas, that's kind of when you want to be a little bit more mindful of like, okay, there's a mix there, but what are they actually eating right now?
Right.
Because if it's primarily brassicas, then some of those like issues with nitrates and.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
Facilia, would there be a palatability issues with that one?
that is not a top choice.
Okay.
So it's not a very palatable plant.
Yeah,
So,
so steer
I don't-
clear of that one if you want to graze them.
or like a small amount
Right.
inclusion. I think the mix that we had done for this demo, there was 1% inclusion.
Okay,
So, I mean,
that's pretty
It's-
small.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I don't think they're gonna be too put out by that.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, great. One's a little bit of a wild card. What can I plant in a wooded area that has had hogs on it for about 6 years? And it's currently, scroll over. It's currently empty of animals.
That's interesting, situation to be in, is what I would say. So obviously you want a soil test. What you could put in really is impacted by how thick that wood stand still is, how many trees are there, how
Right.
dense it is. The type of trees that are there could have an impact. And then you need to account for, what animal species are going to be grazing there.
Right.
So some potential options could be red or white clover. Some grass options could be bluegrass. You could be looking at maybe a fescue like meadow or tall fescue. Maybe perennial ryegrass, something that you could establish around those trees in that area. But again, it's really going to depend on the animal that's going to be there, and the type of trees that you have there and how dense those stands are.
Yeah, okay.
Katie?
You have anything to add?
Yeah, I do. Just your comment about the type of animal that's grazing.
Yeah,
So I would definitely recommend doing a soil test.
Yeah.
I don't know if the question specifies that they are planning to graze this cover crop afterwards, or if they're just looking for a cover crop in general, but I'm gonna make the assumption that they're planning on grazing.
yeah, let's say
But-
that.
Sheep are really sensitive to copper, and
Okay.
hog manure tends to be very high in copper.
Okay,
And so I would be cautious of that if that's what your plan is.
right.
You can get into situations of copper toxicity
Mhm.
pretty quick with sheep. So yeah, just be mindful of that if there's high levels of copper as a result in the soil.
Okay. Great. We're getting through most of our questions. Again, if anybody has any more, feel free to pop them in the chat. My just kind of silly question for you both is, what is your favorite cover crop? And why?
I'm gonna say, this is tough, but I'm probably gonna say fall rye, just because it's.
Yeah.
It's multi-purpose, like it's emergency feed, it could extend your grazing season.
Yeah. Great competitor
Yeah.
in terms of like weed management. That's one of my favorites too.
I guess I would say annual ryegrass. So, again, it's gonna be a lot of growth as long as you feed it, put down the nutrients that it's going to need. You can get multiple cuts out of it, you can get multiple grazings out of it. And depending on the cultivar that you choose, it should die off at the end of the year, depending on the weather conditions. And leave you with the option to do something else.
Wonderful. All right. Check to make sure I haven't missed anything here. Yeah, any final words about grazing cover crops, I guess, before we?
If anyone wants to pop their favorite cover crop in the chat,
Yeah,
I'd love to hear it.
yeah, absolutely. Great suggestion. Final thoughts, Shane?
No, I don't have any final thoughts. I'd be interested to see what people's favorite cover crops. And also if people want to pop in the chat, When do they want to use cover crops when they're grazing? You know, are
Like what
you,
time of year?
what time of year are most people looking at? Are they really trying to tame that summer slump, or are they really looking to extend the grazing season, whether in the spring or in the fall, or maybe even into the winter, depending on their field conditions?
For sure. Has there been any work done with winter triticale?
Turn it over to Caitlin.
Sure, I can take that. Yeah, so winter triticale is definitely something that people seem to be really interested in, especially this year. So we haven't done any work directly with it. I do know some people who are growing it, and I'm kind of looking forward to following that along and kind of seeing how it plays out, and really how it compares, I think, to like fall rye and winter wheat that we've been growing for a long time, and see kind of what the potential advantages or disadvantages to winter triticale would be. So yeah, I guess to answer that question, there's definitely work being done. We're not doing anything specifically right now, but definitely following along the journey. Here. Oh, somebody's favorite is birchfoot trefoil. And also they love frost seeding red clover. I also love frost seeding red clover, I think, because you can do that. Stay tuned, because I just recorded a podcast episode with Shane that should be out very shortly on frost seeding legumes into pastures. But I also really like frost seeding clover like into a winter cereal. It just kind of hangs out underneath there, and after your harvest takes off and you get all sorts of nitrogen credit.
We have, I won't say the farm name specifically, but we did have a great example of somebody who did some broadcasting red clover into cereal stand, I believe, and it was an amazing crop. It was really quite impressive from a cover crop perspective. So
that's actually part of our Living Labs project as well. So we're doing a portion of the Living Labs project here in Nova Scotia on cover crops and annual systems. And so two of the treatments that we're looking at are frost seeded red clover, single cut and double cut red clover into winter wheat. So
yeah, red clover is a great choice too, because it takes off. You can actually get quite a lot of success in germination in red clover in the first year of frost seeding, which you might not see as much with something like a birchfoot trefoil or an alfalfa. So yes, it's fun to see results when you do an action, and red clover gives you that.
Yeah, for sure. We've also got a shout out here for chicory for its deworming properties and the tannins.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool work being done on chicory. It's a cool plant.
Yeah.
It's also like through OFCAF, it is noted as something that may help with reducing methane emissions as well. Cool. So chicory has that other aspect to it too.
Nice. Awesome. Oh yes, no, that's just a comment here about putting red clover into winter wheat. It can be very tricky to get your straw dry. Yeah, no, that's definitely true. If you want to know what your goal is again for the cover crop when you're going in with it. And I will just say, as far as red clover like into a winter cereal goes, single cut red clover is going to be lower growing, less vigorous. So you shouldn't have as much issue in that getting that into your straw. But yes, excellent point. All right. I think we've covered all the questions we had coming in, but if anybody thinks of anything afterwards, feel free to give any of us a shout. Yeah, any final words?
No. Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Yeah, thank you for your questions.
Thank you for the questions.
Yeah, no, it's been really fun. I really like this
fun.
format, and I hope you enjoyed it. We enjoyed being here with you today. So thank you very much, and have a great day.